Call the meeting to order. Clerk, call the roll.
Karazinski.
Here.
Amy. Here. Parker.
Here.
Barch.
Here.
Heather.
Here.
Hickerson.
Here. 7 present, right? 6 present. 6 present, okay? We have 2 sets of minutes to approve. Can I have a motion on the August 7th minutes?
I'll move.
Second.
Okay, discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So a motion on the September 12th, 2018 minutes.
I'll move.
Second.
Discussion,
Thank you. Discussion?
please.
Yes, please.
Just a comment regarding the section regarding our TIF, I'm sorry, not TIF, our conversation regarding the tax levy and the implications of the pilot impact. It says we discussed, basically, I think the sentence is we discussed that item, but I thought we, in addition to the discussion, took a position regarding that being accountable toward levy relative to levy and pensions.
I'm sorry, I apologize. Are we already on the September 12th minutes?
Correct.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yep.
All right.
I had it written down as direction, I had it as discussion. So, that's what I had Amy put it show.
Okay, it's a minor point. I appreciate you bringing it up at the city council presentation as the pilot maybe qualifying toward that. And I would hope maybe the FAC at some point could make a recommendation.
Yeah, I thought we were, if we hadn't, that my recollection's the same as yours, Tom, but since we are going to take up the levy tonight, we will make sure that that issue is included in whatever we choose to send forward.
Great.
I did accidentally skip over public participation. Is there any member?
Did you were only in discussion on the minutes?
sorry.
when we should be-
Yeah.
Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Now, public participation. Is there any member of the public that would like to address the committee? Okay. Hearing none, we will likely come back to that later. Now, we move forward to the property tax levy overview. I will go to Acting City Manager Talkington to introduce the newest document in our packet.
So really the big change here is last time we talked about it, and then we talked about the water pilot. So when I had time in that short turnaround time between our last FXC meeting and City Council to add the water pilot. So if you go to page 5, it still goes over levying the taxes to the policy 1A without the pilot first, and then it discusses that we talked about it here in this committee, and I'll show the reduction of how like giving your credit for the water pilot, and then what the outcome would be on increasing the levy. So that's a big change here. The other factor, I mean, the rest of the information in that report is the same as what you saw last time, except I did add like the 2017 amounts, so you can see the differences throughout. And we recently got our bond rating reviewed on Tuesday, and so we affirmed our A1 position, but we did a negative outlook. And so a big portion of that negative outlook is related to how we fund the pensions, when you look at the credit rating. That I just emailed you guys that today, so I don't expect that you've reviewed it.
The 2 items in there, for those that have not read, I just had a chance when City Manager Talkington showed me the memo and the outlook. They're concerned about funding of pensions, and they're concerned about the university's reliance on the state still, which it's kind of interesting because the same rating agency backed off on the state when the budget got passed, but they're maintaining this as a negative outlook for us, that the university is dependent on state funding. And, I think that has improved somewhat. To me, it's kind of surprising that it's appearing in the outlook. Okay, discussion of the tax levy. I think that there are a number of issues that we need to hit. Number one, we need to hit what should be funded from the levy specifically. We need to hit the possible effects of a downgrade. We haven't had a downgrade in anything with the outlook, but we need to be aware of the fact that the fund balances are also mentioned in the Moody's report, correct?
But it was more of a positive.
I thought that
They did mention that this year we're a little below the 25% policy. However, multiple years, at least in my discussion with them, Dan Meter, multiple years of maintaining the higher fund balance was a positive.
this is, okay. The rating outlook says the negative outlook is based on the city's high and growing pension burden and rising budgetary pressures that are beginning to impact reserves. Okay, that's your reserve balance.
Yeah, it's a negative.
Yeah.
Mine do too.
Okay, so the floor is the committee's.
Well, a couple things, I guess. As far as the policy is concerned and the wish of the policy, the council to abide by that relative to what's included. We talked about pilot and specifically being qualified to, at least from a finance standpoint, be considered as property tax in lieu and therefore applicable to pensions, and that would reduce the pressure on the demand for increased property taxes to that extent. I would suggest also that in addition, the TIF surplus, the 50% TIF surplus is, because the TIF is property tax, it's funded by property tax, it's set aside. And when they declare a surplus, it is property tax being passed back to all entities. And that too should qualify in our discussion. That would be one
The city's share.
the city's share of what they have on the budget, which my numbers are a little old, but they were in the neighborhood of 180 grand. The pilot was, I think you mentioned 320, something like that. So that's 500 grand towards consideration. And that would not then have to be additionally added as property tax burden. We talked about some other things, and I don't know that we clarified them, but in my memo, and I copied Chairman Kettle, I guess, a year ago, and I didn't bring any additional copies, but the labor recovery from NIU regarding fire services is in the neighborhood of 900 to 800, maybe a little more than that, but 900,000 more or less. And you mentioned that as in lieu of taxes or some consideration of that. I'd like to bring that to the table as well, and then maybe we should just deal from one at a time. The next one I would bring would be the ambulance service, which I think Chair Bell had a problem with. And the water, well, let's leave it at that. The NIU piece of fire services for discussion.
I want to make sure that, now this is,
Maybe the group doesn't know what I'm talking about.
I don't, where is it? I'm seeing that.
Right.
We don't.
It's not there.
part of this was in our discussion last time. Most of it
Yeah.
was in our discussion last time. I think that I'm not comfortable with the description that you've given about the impact on the tax levy. Okay. This does not count against what we might have as the tax levy.
Right.
Okay, but it counts as going through, you know, you've got in this particular, in the tax levy policy, okay, you have these different levels of funding, okay? And they're A, B, C, D, and E, okay?
Page 2 of the memo.
Page 2 of the memo, okay, that was in the packet for tonight. In order to meet A, which is the one that has primarily been discussed, which is the levy for police, fire, and IMRF pensions per the actuarial calculations, okay? Right now, in terms of the levy itself, okay, before we do any accounting, before the levy itself, we are covering only a portion of police and fire, correct? Okay, so if the committee were to decide in favor of at least fully funding A, again, that's police, fire, IMRF, okay, that's going to require a number that is larger than just simply police and fire. Okay. Now, of that total amount, a certain portion of it can be offset by the types of things that Tom's talking about. Okay. It doesn't mean that we're going to end up at a levy number that's smaller than, let's say, what we were doing where we weren't funding all of police and fire. We may be at the same, but by accounting, you're going to end up funding all of A, all of police and fire, and you may end up funding IMRF. And those funds will be part of the levy discussion or
Yes.
the levy resolution that they're saying, all right, this is going to come out of the property tax levy itself. And then here are other property tax earmarked sources that add up that this is what the pension contribution is going to be out of property tax sources. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to end up with a lower levy,
Right.
but it will mean that you're funding more of
Pension.
the expenses that are within the levy policy.
I basically agree with you, saying this. Yep. And by purposes of crediting these other items to the 500,000 plus the existing levy, we come much closer to funding all of
Yes, we
pension
do that,
liabilities,
that's correct.
okay? So,
I was gonna say, the one caveat I have on that is if we go back to your bond rating, Moody's might accept probably the water pilot, but when you start to get to the NIU fire services or ambulance service, it's not going to bear as much weight as the actual property tax levy.
I understand that that's going to take some excellent communication on the city's part to make them understand.
The bottom line is, we're going to have to, you know, they have experience, but they need to recognize that what is ultimately being done, okay, the pilot definitely, and the contract less so, but there's no reason that that should not be viewed as a reliable source of income. I mean, what they're really concerned about is the ability to have a reliable source of income. And, you know, and the better matching that you get of the users with the cost of the services, the better that's going to be. So, you know, if I were the city and this is undertaken, one of the things that the city will have to do is meet with Moody's and say, all right, here's our response, and we want you to look deeply, because you're not going to pick this up in a quick reading of a comprehensive annual financial report. But there's a reason and there's a rationale associated with that reason, and there is no way in the world they can argue with the TIF surplus. That is just, they may try to argue, but that is property taxes.
We did this report that you received, so when Bob Miller and I, and then Elizabeth Hennessy, our bond
Right.
advisor, met with Moody's on the call, I did give them this report that explained the water pilot, so there was some discussion of that. Now, this didn't include the other ones that Chairman Terzinski brought up, or committee members. Losing my mind today. So we did discuss the pilot in that. So and they also had this memo to go through it. So whatever consideration you guys want to put over into kind of how that water pilot is shown, is kind of the offset, we can do that. It'll show up in this report. And the TIF funding, it is property tax. The TIF funding is going away within 5 years.
I was gonna say, that's a short-term fix, that's not, I
It
don't know
won't
that
be-
Moody's is gonna put that much weight on short-term mandates.
But we can
They like the
put it-
process.
Through here.
Correct.
But
It's good.
that's a red herring, because in 5 years, you're going to have the property tax revenue instead. So in theory, every dollar of that is going to be counted plus more, because all of that's going to be in the property tax levy. It can be used anyway for these purposes, so.
In fact, it'll double.
It should.
You're only getting 50%
Right,
surplus, so
it should
when it
double.
comes back, it'll be twice as big. So
Uh-huh.
instead of 320, it's gonna be 640. And I would argue, I would again, if I were thinking about a presentation, I would make that fact well known.
So I do have it called out, when you look at that 5-year financial plan, again, I gave that to Moody's as well, I used all these reports. It shows where, like, when you looked at the 5-year, that where TIF 2 starts to add back
Right.
on. So it is accounted for in there, called out.
And so that, all that money can be therefore applied towards
Right, it just.
whatever increase occurs between now and then for the pension.
But here's what the city has to do, okay? What the city has to do, and I'm talking about the legislators, the city council has to do, is that 640,000 can't be used as an offset. That 640,000 has to immediately be accounted for as an increase in the levy. And it has to be an increase in the amount of property taxes that you're collecting and putting toward pensions. Because that $640,000 does not exist unless you levy the property tax.
Oh, yeah, you gotta get it back. But I don't think, my assumption is that will absolutely be levied. That would be crazy not to. because
Well, I
that's
know,
existing revenue.
But,
That's just a
but
fixed
Tom,
amount.
we've heard too many times, and I'm not arguing with you, I'm
Yes.
commiserating. We've heard too many times, well, we don't want to raise the levy. Well, if you've suddenly got this 640,000 that's going into the regular levy, you darn well better make sure you increase your levy by at least 640,000 to stay even.
With the intent being there was absolutely no impact on the home.
So that's similar
At that
to
point.
that option on the
Right.
EAV growth for your tax levy.
So-
So when I capture that growth, we try to target the same region.
So if we capture that, we're at 500. And then we had started to discuss the fire services piece from NIU. NIU has a contract with the city to reimburse them for fire services. And that's a labor contract with the, in a fair perspective, is intended to recoup the labor costs associated with it. That's the basis of this. And right now that stands at 900-some thousand plus.
Wait a minute, now let's make sure that we get the two contracts correct. There's a fire services contract, and then there's the contract for the services and events.
No, I'm just talking about the fire
Okay.
services.
Okay.
The basic fire
But we
services.
did talk about this, you were here, weren't you?
Right, right.
Weren't you at the last meeting? And we did discuss
Right.
this. And I think that's not something we should be stirring up at this moment. I think we
I'm not-
can improve it, but I've heard people saying, fine, we'll give the fire contract to somebody else. I would be totally opposed to that, to try and save a few bucks, because that's where we get into that draconian, let's cut to the bone, and the consequences be damned, and I just think the university's got their own issues, so why we would pick on NIU now?
We're not-
Oh, no,
We're not
no,
talking
no, this
about-
doesn't,
we're
this
not
doesn't.
talking
Are we talking about a contract for fire services?
No, we already
The city
have
provides
it.
to
We already
NIU.
have it.
Correct, and there was discussion of changing that we
No,
weren't getting enough money.
that's not on
Don't
the
leave
table.
me off.
No,
This is what I
no,
recall,
no,
so if
no,
I'm
no.
wrong, explain that to me.
No, I'm not, I'm sorry.
Well, you did.
That was a gesture that was not meant as waving.
All
you off.
right, then I'm missing a piece here.
What I'm saying is that I don't believe that anyone on the committee expressed an interest in getting rid of the contract with.
I did hear that, so maybe I'm crazy. I heard two people say, let Sycamore take it then, and we won't do it.
I think that was.
I take what I hear people say, not what they're supposed to be meaning. So if we're
Right.
using illusions here, people should be more clear on it, because that's what I heard. And if I'm the public, listen, that's what I would have taken from that too, because they do get it.
No, I think what came up, Ron, was, and we're trying to come to a common understanding of it.
Right.
No argument here. I think that what was expressed was the fact that, we need to make sure that we have an appropriate cost recovery contract with the
Correct.
university. And I think there was concern expressed that maybe the university would back out. And then somebody
Also
said,
concerned that it didn't meet our 25%. You remember that? We talked
Yes.
about.
Yes, I
Yes.
remember that
Yes, you
too.
do.
So
But-
setting aside our how the contracts are set in place, we have a current contract
Yes.
Right.
with fire services, and how much is that, chief?
832,000
$832,000 right now.
Okay.
per year. Annually,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's a lump sum or for up to that? Paid 2 times per year, half each
no, it's a lump sum.
If I understood
It's not a
correctly.
fee for service, it's a lump sum.
We provide fire service by contract, so we have 2 different setups through NIU. So we provide fire service and EMS services for $832,000 a year. Half of that is charged in equal installments twice a year. Also, with that, we do get some revenue by ambulance fees, so if we need transport out of it, we still recoup ambulance fees additionally to that contract.
We don't charge per use, it's a contract.
So-
So we're really on the same page on this, it's just semantics.
For how many
I
years?
think so.
Okay.
Chief, how many years is that contract?
Well, we're starting the contract negotiations for next year. So
Okay.
this is the 5th year of the contract. When the contract originally was started, it was about $300,000. And then we put an escalator in there because we were way underfunded back when the contract originally,
Yeah, I
for many,
remember.
many years.
Yeah.
And we put an escalator up to $831 the 5th year. Right now, when you figure cost per call, we're probably right in the money, cost per call,
Okay.
as opposed to what the residents pay.
And who negotiates that, chief?
The city staff does.
The city staff?
If I recall correctly, I think part of what we were talking about was the concern that when the contract that's existing now was put into place, that it had not been fully loaded
Right.
to cover everything. And I thought that, well, the last time we met, we all talked about it quite a bit, and it sort of left it as going, it's a contract, it's there, we don't want to do anything to disrupt or harm it, it's a contract, we honor those. But we realize full well that in future, we should think very carefully about making sure we're doing a full cost recovery before we establish a price. And if I remember correctly, I think that's how it was pretty much left.
That's true, but that also applied to the other contract.
Yes,
Where
it did. It
where
did.
it was a
Yes,
fee for
yes,
service,
yes.
that we needed to
Yes.
make sure that.
Full
For-
cost
yeah.
recovery.
Right.
Yes.
And I think that the discussion within the committee is such, and I'm trying to move this toward where we want to be. I'm not trying to assume anything in terms of other committee members' opinions. I'm just trying to state what my understanding of where we're at is. It is consistent with the discussions that we had last time, to my memory, that we were saying that the contract for fire services, the main contract, this $830,000 contract, was something that was being collected for fire services and EMS, if you want to separate those. And of that, a portion of the cost that you're recovering, at least a portion, is personnel costs. And therefore, a portion or all of that contract revenue should be applied as an offset for a university contribution or a contribution from the contract towards the pensions that are attributable to the
Labor costs.
to the labor costs of the fire department. Is that,
That's fair.
Yeah. Okay.
all right? So I think that's where we're at, but we still have some decisions.
But the one, so I think
This
what,
too is an accounting presentation.
Right.
It doesn't change
Right.
any dollars, it's a matter of perspective about how much money is being collected that are, in addition to what we discussed, attributable to payment of, or could be attributable to payment of pension. So if we said that the pension portion of the labor contract for this, pick a number, just for working purposes, I'm going to throw out 20%. It is of the total cost of that could be related to the pension, our total loaded cost of the, and I use reimbursement as a piece of that pension, and there's a number attached to that. And for mathematical purposes, I'll throw out 20%. So 20% of 800 is $160,000 that you might attribute to the payment of these pension obligations. And if it was presented that way, along with this 500,000, we'd have much higher level of coverage of our pension obligations from these collected direct property tax plus this particular labor piece. So that there wouldn't be this $1 million gap or $1.2 million. It's substantially smaller, and the problem is substantially smaller. It doesn't solve any real budget problems here. We're just talking about presentation and understanding about where this money is. With that, that's what I'm trying to do, is if we put that in this, then I would be in favor of that. I'd be in favor of including that.
Now, I think it's important to recognize that there are budgetary implications of this, okay? And what in effect, the budgetary implications of this is that we are, in effect, paying the pensions first, which is one of the things that's very consistent with what Moody's has said. It's also consistent with what we're levying property taxes for. And for every dollar that we earmark, even if it's an accounting earmark as opposed to a firm earmark, that is $1 less that can be spent on the other things that are necessary for the provision of city services. So I think it's wrong to say it's kicking the can down the road, but what it's doing is it's saying, all right, we're putting this in as a priority for funding, and therefore the amount available in terms of revenue for the other things that we want to do will necessarily be less.
So on page 2 is the priority
for the tax levy,
for
correct?
the tax levy.
Yes.
First is police, fire, MIRF.
I will.
But budget terms, if we go to the next topic of the $1.6 million gap, shifting these there, you still keep a $1.6 million gap. You added-
Or increase it.
Added
You know,
to your,
It's the same gap.
right, the
We're just
gap.
talking about how the pie is
So now
split.
you have to-
and
How it's reported out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's
How we're
either,
allocating the fund.
you're lessening, if you're going to recommend any increase on tax levy, you're lessening the amount you would recommend here, but you would look to either cuts, revenues, or fund balance over there.
Right, well, basically what you're doing is you're reducing your degrees of freedom for that 1.6 million. Because you're saying, all right, we're going to fund these expenditures from these various revenue sources. So those expenditures come off that, but also those revenues come off, and it's a 1-for-1. So you've still got $1.6 million set, but you've got fewer revenue items and fewer cost items within which to balance the budget.
Okay. So I'd ask if there, I don't know how you want to handle this, Chair, if there's some agreement to that method of, what I would say is more proper and a more inclusive presentation to the city council regarding how much of the pensions are actually covered. And I think a good clarification and a proper clarification.
Through property tax sources or equivalents, whatever you want to
Exactly.
call
Or, excellent word.
So I think that as a starting point, because there will continue to be debate on the levy, correct? Sure. Okay. I think as a starting point, we say, all right, let's take the employer-required funding of 6.58277. And is that what was being recommended as the levy?
Is that the most
It
likely?
depends on which one,
Is
which
that the most
scenario.
likely?
No, that is what the actuarial
Those
reports
three
out for
are
police.
6582.
6582 is just police and fire.
Correct.
it.
All right.
Not-
Okay, so,
So what
correct.
on page 4 is it?
So on page 4, the, let me just take a look. All right, so you took the water pilot out. Okay, so let's, see, I'm not so sure that, all right, I'm sorry, let me look at this again here. So right now, we're talking about, in order to fully fund at the estimated rate, we need to go through, what would be, A, B, and C maybe? On the,
On the policy,
yeah, I think it's A, B, and C.
only A is police, fire.
No, but I'm saying that what you're showing here, police, fire, IMRF,
No, I'm
okay,
only
so,
showing you, I'm just showing. A.
oh, you're showing
I
A.
didn't even go to B.
Okay, so the full cost of A would appear to be $7.85 million.
Plus the, so it's A and C.
And debt service.
Yeah.
Right, no, okay,
So no B.
fair enough, no B, A and C. So the baseline here is $7.85 million,
Mhm.
okay? And what we're, in terms of what we're arguing, okay, do we get any money from the debt service for the library? do we get any money for that?
No, the library.
We're just
We
donating
go
it?
straight to the, yep, that way.
So the city's contributing $500,000?
No, we bring in the tax and then just pay it straight out. So
Like
it
a
falls
conduit.
under the city's tax levy.
Correct.
It doesn't fall
But
under the
it's-
library
Oh, okay.
operations levy.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so if we worked backwards from the 7.847 million, okay, what we would do is we'd say, all right, without doing anything with respect to B,
Right.
which was
Thank you.
FICA, okay, which is about how much?
I put it on there. It is 625.
All right, so if we started with 7.85 million, then what our goal is through these property tax related sources of revenue, we're trying to take in the range of perhaps as much as $1 million. 500,000 to $1 million. Because 300,000 right off the bat was the pilot. And let's just assume for the sake of example, well, we don't have to assume for the sake of example. Let me just take a look here. This is not the, okay. So, all right, I lost that. Go ahead.
If we take care of A through D, whatever it is.
Yeah, A and C is what they should.
Everything there, we're gonna be close to $2 million short.
Yeah, it's that 1 point.
1.6, 1.35 plus,
No, we're already,
Plus another 625.
plus
if you
another
pick up
625.
So it's
Oh.
two.
It's two.
Yeah.
We're $2 million
Right.
short.
Well, we're not talking about FICA at this particular point. We could.
I know we aren't, but it's on the list.
Right, no, absolutely. But we've already found 310,000 from the pot, and that seems to be not, that's okay with Moody's, and that's, okay. So,
To go against the 2 million.
to go against the 2 million. That, I like your thought of the 2
And
million.
the pilot is brand new money. That is true to money.
It's
No,
really-
we
That's
had
money
It is
with,
related.
no, it's, they're reallocated.
We're essentially reallocating it to be used for any service in the general fund, to use it solely for police and fire pension funding, or A, B, and C, depending on how far down you go.
And then if we took the, and this would be conservative, if we took the $800,000 for the NIU Fire Services contract, and we assumed 20% of that to go, and there is some mathematical reason why 20% may not be a horrible number. That's 160,000, okay? And if we took the TIF surplus, that was another 170,000, you said, Tom?
I had 180 back.
180, so 350, so there's a third of it, there's 650,000. So, so including Social Security, we would be in better shape than that is being shown here in terms of the increase in the levy. We'd be at, let's see, if we took 8.4, we'd be at like 7.4 million for the levy after including Social Security. So we'd be down about $1 million, somewhere in that range, which is a $300,000 improvement.
Yeah, plus we weren't originally considering FICA per se. so-
And if you took FICA off, then you're down to
You're
300,000.
close.
I'll say as a
Same on
council,
levy.
No, we keep the levy. What did it say on the levy?
According to this, it has to go up 20% of the 1,350,000.
If you,
Yeah, it would be able to,
So you're talking probably.
you'd be able to reduce it. To about
30%
7
increase to 2 million.
Chair, so if you go from the 7.8 million
Yeah,
and I reduce those 30, you're down to 7.2 million.
okay.
So it is an increase over last year, because last year was 6.5.
Right, but what I'm saying is, it's saving 600,000 on what you would levy this year,
Correct.
correct? So we're reducing the levy over what we would have otherwise had to levy, not including Social Security, but that wasn't part of the levy. So we have, in effect, I don't want to be too audacious, but does that reduce 600,000? Well, no, it wouldn't. I was going to say, does that reduce 600,000 off the deficit? I don't think it does.
No, the deficit remains
The
the
deficit remains the
The
same.
dollars remain the same. 2 million short, just a matter of what the levy.
Right.
Right, and then you have to look at the other.
So, let's go through. What's your reaction to the discussion? I mean, should we put forth a recommendation that, okay, that we start from the 7.85 million and then we start having offsets on that based on these revenue sources?
I mean, sport like the pilot, right?
Yeah.
Payment in lieu of Texas.
Right.
Yes. I personally feel that we should include all those, things that are equivalent to a property tax, such as the pilot, the scrape off of the contracts that would be going to pension costs, and help, there's several more, and the TIF,
surplus.
the surplus out of the TIF, and there was one other one. help.
You could actually take a portion, now this is definitely a limited time thing, but you could take a portion of, in theory, it should be a portion of the TIF administrative fee, should also go toward pension costs. So,
If it's a labor, if there's some labor in there, there's pension attached to it, it needs to be covered. And we've got some opportunities to help it have a better appearance, and I think we should do it. Definitely the pilot, the surplus on the TIF, the labor portion of the contracts. And I realize we live with contracts we have. In the future, they should be fully loaded to reflect all costs, but there is perhaps something there now that we need to correct.
all right, I'm going to go back to something I asked before, the debt service. Okay. That debt service is not something that we have to pay, correct? The city.
We levy it for the library.
Right, and so that we levy, that's part of the levy, but that $500,000 comes back because the library pays the debt service.
No, we don't actually bring that into the general fund. We get the levy.
I understand that. You get the levy, okay? That 494 never comes into the general fund, goes to the library,
The
right?
library pays it.
Right. That 7.85 million includes that 500,000.
Right, and included it last year, so that's not
No.
actually part of the
No.
increase.
Okay, all right. But, okay, all right, but it's whack.
You're saying it's a wash.
Yes.
Well, it is a wash, but but as Molly says, it doesn't, if you're looking at the increase from last year, It was in there before, it's in there again, so it doesn't contribute. By taking it out of there, we don't reduce the increase over last year because we'd have to take it out of last year's number too. So, anyway, Bob, where are you at?
Well, if we're thinking of this as payments in lieu of real estate taxes,
Yes.
then I think it ought to be accounted for as any other real estate tax coming in. It should be apportioned out on the same basis as any other real estate tax.
Ron?
I'm for the offsets, I'm
Okay, that's
okay with it.
Steve?
Yeah, I agree, but just, so we're moving monies, right? From here to there. How does that affect the budget process? Are we,
So you're essentially saying, in the scenario without the offsets, if you wanted to say you're going to fund 1A and C, the Labrador, fully through just property tax levy, no offsets, you would need to increase it to go up that $1.3 million. Now that you've done the offsets, you're reducing it down. So,
Probably
Like a
be around
600.
7 million.
yeah,
700,000. You're reducing it by 7.
right. So it's half, about half of what this is. But you didn't shift the need to find that money somewhere else. So you're,
For other purposes.
right, so you're minimizing your ability to use property tax levy to a fuller amount because you're saying you're crediting these other sources to pay for this service. And this service happens to be police, fire, and IMRF pension funding.
okay.
So now you're going to have to look at other sources to fund, to fill your gap.
Tom gets this, so I'm gonna, you know.
Yeah, I obviously I am for it, and I think what my thoughts about this is we're correcting the policy. And
Right.
we're correcting the policy and how it's applied. That's all we're doing, is we're really addressing policy. And the presentation that the staff makes to the city council, which has not shown these things, which creates this huge burden in their conversation that isn't there. This burden never existed. And when I was a council member, I frankly discounted it because we were paying the pension anyway. We're going to pay the pension bill. Doesn't matter. We're going to pay the pension bill, and we always have, to the extent that we cover it with our whoever the consultant is at that particular time. But we've always paid what was agreed in that amount, and it was paid out of the general fund. And this is just a list of things that we throw at the wall that say it applies toward that, but it's all coming out of one bucket. So it's really a policy clarification, largely.
It's more than that, though. And this is where Moody's comes in, okay? There's two things that we get out of this, okay, that are not trivial. Number one, we have a policy for the property tax levy, okay? This is a truer representation of the fact that we are very close. We aren't really going into the unrestricted general fund, in quotes, to meet the policy. Second of all, from the perspective of somebody looking at this as an outsider, there's no sleight of hand involved here.
Right.
This is saying, okay, here's the amount that's going to come out of the levy. And here are the other, this year, reliable sources of revenue that can be utilized to finance the property tax, and we name them. We're not going off without a plan. We are going to name where we're going to get this money, and we're going to use sources that have a rational nexus to what we're funding. And though some of these sources will be reduced in the future, there still will be a TIF administrative fee, and part of that is paying for the pensions on the people that are providing services to the TIF. And you should, have a fully loaded thing. But the pilot's not going to go away. The NIU contract is not going to go away.
And the TIF surplus isn't going away, and when it does go away, it's going to double in our favor.
Yes,
Right.
so it's all a
Yeah.
good thing.
None of those are going away,
So I think,
except,
We're treating those as in lieu of real estate tax.
right.
essentially, right, the equivalent.
The percentage is fixed of what we do with that.
Right.
Same as any other real estate
So
tax.
how it'll show on here is similar to the pilot. So I only have the pilot reduced
Right.
on here, and then I'll show the other ones reduced on here.
Correct. Correct. Okay, and we don't know the hard numbers. But as-
Exact numbers.
Okay, as a concept, do I have a motion to approve this as a recommendation to the city council?
So moved.
I'll second it.
Okay, further discussion?
Yeah, just a clarification, so if I understand, we're including the pilot, we're including the tax surplus distributed from TIF, we're including that portion of the fire services contract that might apply. Those are the items I,
I think I have the administrative fee, that a portion of that.
I'm
Go.
gonna suggest on that one that we restrain ourselves from
Okay,
that until
fine.
that's clarified,
All right, fair enough.
given
Yeah, all right,
our current action.
fair enough.
But the
Those are solid.
The one I would include that is also solid, similarly, is the water administrator fee that is passed on from the water department to the general fund, which is about $560,000. Those are administrative fees charged from people who are in the general fund that are charged against water because they do water
Yes.
billing, they do partial this, they do partial
So
that.
it's similar to.
It's similar
It would
to,
not
it's a
be the
labor
full
recovery.
amount.
No, it wouldn't be the full amount. It would be-
20%.
It would, well, with IMRF, it might not be as high.
Whatever the appropriate.
Because
amount.
we're not funded, but so, I think it would be fair, to say 10%.
Yeah, and whatever the real number is, I would go with.
Yeah.
For purposes of discussion, the right numbers. But that item,
And it is important to realize that almost all of the FICA is attributable to people that are under IMRF, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so even if we don't fund FICA, if we fund IMRF, we're still funding a substantial portion of those pensions, because those dollars are going toward our pension costs for those individuals. And we're already having to pay the employer's share,
Total revolving.
yeah,
So-
which is that 800,000.
so I guess I'm amending the second to include the water administration cost transfer, that portion that's attributable to pension
Okay.
or IMRF.
Sounds like a great premium to
Yeah.
me.
That's, yes.
Yeah.
And any other?
I would make one other comment that I think Louis will understand if you work with him. The concept of this, in lieu of real estate taxes, much better than where it's being stated now.
I would
We
say,
understand general obligation, we understand real estate
right,
taxes.
I will
We
say,
understand that.
I can give them the reports and we can go over how it's written, but they have a much stricter formula because there, even it's like a comment period for me to review and I have some questions, but
This is
this
not a
will be a
formulaic
different,
thing.
this will be a different conversation.
Don't want to get off onto that, but.
Yeah. But I will, it'll be in a report, we can give them a report, and we can go over it. So as much as it'll help, it'll be there.
And one more, and another thing, please. I think it would be helpful for all of us, although probably all of you are already doing this, and all the city council to realize that anytime you do anything that is a labor cost, you are dragging around pensions with you every
You're
single
driving around
time.
fringe benefits.
Right,
period.
fringe benefits, pensions, all
Yeah,
sorts.
everything.
It's not just what you're paying them. People forget sometimes.
And and I'm not going to open the Pandora's box that we've had for 10 years about attributing outside payments that are reimbursements for overtime and things like that, and not putting that against against personnel costs, so.
Okay, after all those friendly changes, what have we got now that we're gonna vote on?
Well, I don't know, Tom made an amendment, I don't know if there was a second.
Second,
Okay.
so we vote on the amendment
With the
first.
amendment, it'd be the water pilot, the TIF 50% surplus, around 20% fire service contract NIU, and probably 5 to 10% of that water and fee, but we'll get the real numbers. And then I'll address it in the report to come.
The original motion, Tom has asked, and
I made an amendment.
Lynn has seconded that the fact that there is no original motion, that this is now the motion that we're voting
Okay.
on.
Okay.
You withdrew your motion and we just
Oh,
substituted.
I did, okay.
That we just substituted the motion with the fourth item in there, so we only have
Oh.
one vote. Any questions?
I'm sorry, that's fine, but I didn't use
Sorry.
it, but that's okay.
Clerk, call the roll.
Karasinski,
Yes.
Bailey,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Parch,
Yes.
Kettle,
Yes.
Dickerson.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That was a very good discussion. Now we move on to the
Budget balancing measure.
the budget balancing measures. Now, are these suggestions or is this what they're going to do?
Nope, they're suggestions, so
Okay.
if you go through the
Now,
packet,
it's this one, right? That's this report, right? Okay, good. Was very
so I can
interested in that.
go over the layout of the report. I think some people, based on questions that
Balance,
have
okay.
Yeah, these are possibilities.
If not, we'll see what happens.
I wasn't going to dive deep into each item, but you guys can ask questions if you want. So at the very beginning, we go back to our 5-year plan where we identified that structural imbalance of 1.6 million. And that the budget strategy is to bring the budget back in line to our fund balance policy with the FY19 budget, which starts January 1, 2019. So that, if you go to the first few pages are a recap of all that we've done, but on that page 5, that shows you, well, one, narratively talks about the forecast, but then shows you visually what
Yes.
that gap is, okay? So if you follow the red line, we start to fall below. The important thing to remember on the forecast is cumulative. So if you make a change in the beginning, it helps a lot more towards the end because it builds on itself. And this forecast assumes no changes in services going forward to what we have right now, and no changes to our once I kind of adjusted the FY18 budget, because remember I took down the building permit information, right, when we did the budget for 18, we had the Steve project in and kind of the outshoot projects from there. So we've redone it to now known projects that reduce that revenue. We added back in the Peace Road agreement with the county, the funding for that, and then the pension. So all that stuff kind of works together to help build that gap. So the first thing we start with is, I was calling them the recommended measures. The first thing I did though is to put together the forecast first in June. And so I got new information in July. So like the Illinois Municipal League updated their figures for income tax and personal property replacement. So I adjusted those things that I got better information from since the first time we did it. And so that actually in total reduced the income on 18 and 19. Then, when we looked at all the departments, when I identified the gap, I had asked all the department heads, I sent an email to all employees, I asked anyone, we went to council, any feedback, any ideas people had. I took all the ideas that we got. The fire department was actually really involved. They gave us lots of ideas. They were really thinking kind of outside of the box to help try to solve that funding gap. And so there are 3 revenue. These are what I was calling the recommended measures from the interim city manager. So these are how I kind of took all the information, synthesized, and said this is how we could solve that $1.6 million gap. But it does include 3 revenues. The largest one is the increase in the ambulance fees. So when we do transports, we charge kind of more different amounts of different transports. This would change it to a flat rate. We'd restructure the false alarm fire fees, and we'd add an intercept ambulance fee. So all that adds a little over 300,000 in revenue. The majority of how to balance this budget is through expenditure reduction. And it results in, if you did everything that was on here and didn't change it, 8 full-time, 4 part-time position reduction, so 10 FTEs total. And it takes us back down to FY13 staffing levels.
8 full-time and 4 part-time,
Yes.
and that balances the 1.6 total,
Mhm.
based on this list, including the ambulance fees.
Right, so you need those 3 revenues plus
Okay.
those reductions. So there's a lot of restructuring within departments. And then when you go through that list, because this is just one recommendation, right? I put together alternative considerations. So if council looks at this, or you guys look at recommendation and say, no, there's no way the city can reduce that service. So let's say we don't want to eliminate the account technician for finance, because you guys really think the finance swing and work that we need to do, we need to keep the staffing levels, and we're that so important that finance needs to keep their staff number. Well, that amount needs to be offset somewhere else. So if you keep the staffing in finance, what are other alternatives that you can put in there? So we gave, if you go to page 16, those alternative considerations, that there's a list of things you could reduce expenditure-wise, or council then also has the opportunity to look at revenues, right? Because you can balance the budget by decreasing expenditures, increasing revenues, or use your fund balance to go below that policy. So there's alternative expenditure reductions. Then there's a list of their existing revenues, and I wrote out what the revenue is, what an increase would bring, what would be the positive impact of that, and then the negative impact. So there's pros and cons for each one, but it walks you through those. And then essentially, if they wanted to, you could, council could choose to use fund balance to get us to a different point in time. So we wanted to use fund balance to get us to where TIF 1 is in 40 years, because we know we'll do the property tax increase in TIF 1. That could be an option. Now that, out of all the scenarios, going to fund balance is the least likely recommended from me, and I think it's the least likely recommended that council would look to.
I'm sorry, which is the least likely?
Using fund balance, because their whole goal is to try to get back to policy. So actually,
Which is
25% expenditure right now. So in the current budget year, because we made those adjustments, we're a little below the 25% level. So council's actually said they're comfortable using fund balance to get us through FY18, so we can bring it back into line with FY19. So we can use this time to make thoughtful decisions and not just make these changes immediately. Really think about what that service impact will be, and if they really want to choose that service impact. So that's how this is laid out. And then if the budget balancing measures are taken, then they fill that gap. That last page on 24 shows how it shifts, right? The red dotted line is where it started, but if you made the changes under the recommended, that's where we fall in line to the policy. So really, the question for FAC is there some level of comfort or recommendation that you as a group would like to give to council, what to pursue to make those adjustments? Do you recommend they find it all through expenditure reductions, use a combination? Is there a revenue source you want them to look at? So it's a big area for you guys to look at, what you want to recommend.
I think it's highly likely that a combination, not just all of one thing or the other, would be.
Picking different components.
Right, right.
Yeah, I think it's very important that, one, if you will, not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that it's very important that one think about the relative benefits that come from a position or come from an expenditure along with cost. Okay. Now, I'm not advocating for a difference in what's in the proposal, but I'll give you an example, okay? If you don't have a human resources professional, the question would be, do you increase your exposure
That's what I
to
was
things
questioning.
like a Me Too or a...
Malpractice or.
Right.
Because there's so many
Different
websites
things.
out there now.
And there's, you know, there's a lot of that requires some professional expertise. So that's just an example. Or, you know, when you eliminate a firefighter and you have to go to short staffing a shift, you know, what is the expected cost that you might have and what is the probability of incurring that particular cost? So I think you need to look at both sides, and that's why I think Lynn's opinion that we're probably going to have to do this through a balance of actions that are going to not be exclusively on the expenditure side, but also be very supportive of a very conservative approach to the dollars that the city spends.
And I would say all the expenditure reductions, that is a service reduction in some form.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. May I ask the chiefs a question? Right. Both of you are here, perfect. How reliant are the two of you, hi Joelle, and I don't mean, how important is it to each of you and each of your staffs and your operations for an IT director to be around and updating and managing that? Okay, I see you nodding, Jean, but talk, please.
Well, when you look at the technology utilized in law enforcement agencies today, and for example, in our department, we have pretty much a state-of-the-art records management system, CAD to CAD, which is computer-aided dispatching that supports 911 and all dispatching services. There is just a plethora of things that we do now using technology that we never did before. Without having adequate IT staff, that really stifles that development. And even if you have it, it stifles the ability to keep it up and running and repair it. So I think it's mission critical for us. It's also mission critical for the community because there's a 911 center downstairs that we're currently trending to 59,000 calls for police service in 1 year. Last year we had 53,000. As of the end of August, we are 4,000 more than we were the preceding August at the same time.
And I'm sorry, after you finish, would you please speak also, Chief? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I mean, and we also had over 23,000 911 calls. We're trending higher than that this year. So your community is linked to that. Every time, you know, the police communications center not only dispatches for police, it dispatches for fire. So ambulance service, fire service delivery is dependent on that. I mean, and the council, and I know Tom Tarazinski can address this from the day I got here, the council's been advocating do more with less and do it with technology. So when you do that, and then you shift gears and you can't support it, you have budget cuts taking people away, your technology doesn't work, you're doubly impacted.
So are these sworn officers that do this?
Sworn officers that do what?
Do your IT?
Right now, we have a police commander that supports IT here because he has the personal skills, but he is supplementing what IT doesn't have. Yeah. So it's a matter of
You need an
necessity.
interface between a department and IT. I mean, yeah, it makes perfect sense. We've kind of built systems where you almost can't have, I mean, I think of your department first. It's been upgraded and revamped, and I think it would be a problem if you just eliminated, because I don't see I didn't mean to get all finished on I see for HR you have an option, like for a full-time journalist, we don't have that option for IT so much, do we? So it's like,
Well,
No, the reason why the IT director was put on the list is really because when the kind of vision was put in place to add an IT director, so we've only had an IT
Yeah, it's
director
only
2
a
or
couple of
3.
years, isn't it?
There was more of that visionary, we're gonna do larger projects.
Yeah.
Bring us to kind of higher level efficiency. We have not been providing the resources for IT. So last year, during the budget process, one of the IT technicians was cut. So that department shrunk. We've reduced some of the funding for IT. So it's difficult to do those projects at the level that
Right.
we've asked when we've reduced the funding and the tools for
Yeah.
that person to do it. So this would bring us back to doing more basic, first line IT in the city. Yeah, it'd be more technical support. We're not doing those larger visioning projects.
So I'll echo what the chief said. I mean, we operate the same exact systems that they do. It's the same CAD system. Radio systems are slightly different, but it's the same in-car, in-vehicle computers. It's really no difference in the system. So, I mean, another big deficit we have is hardware and software. I mean, we are not upgrading that where we used to be. Most of our hardware is 5 or 6 years old, and you know, if you want to stay up to date, you got to keep buying new.
Thank you. The point, I wanted to hear from these guys especially, but, and if you disagree with me, fine, but I'm going to say this. To cut too hard on your IT is like eating your seed when you're a farmer. I just,
Oh, I'm with you. I think it's just asking for, because again, it's a short-term savings and long-term, you're going to spend
cutting your
more
throat.
because technology changes so quickly,
And we're,
frankly.
and we're dependent
I
on
mean,
it.
let's be real, hardware, like computers, we replace every 3 years, because stuff gets obsolete quickly, and systems are updated, and I'm totally with you on that, that caught my eye.
Well, that's one thing I feel very strongly about, because we are increasingly dependent on it as our population.
It's not going away, it's only gonna,
I think that I would like to make a suggestion not to in any way reduce the discussion that we have. I will keep discussion open. But I think that there are a couple of things that would be helpful in this process, because this is an overwhelming amount of information. And it's, you know, and it's a general equilibrium system in the sense that if you change one thing,
Right.
you're changing
Sure,
another.
sure.
So I think it would be helpful, and maybe the city council will ask you to do this anyway, Molly. But from staff perspective, I would like to see a rough prioritization of the cuts. And a recommendation clearly with respect to, from a professional standpoint, recognizing that's not a political standpoint, but from a professional standpoint, what would you do on the revenue side? Now, to me, it would be acceptable if we put things into like 5 categories if you didn't want to rank everything individually, so that you had, you know, most important, next most important, or, you know, most, yeah, like tiers, you know, in terms of where you can cut. And what I would ask on the other hand, and this would be something that we would need to get maybe in, you know, our next meeting, I think, is the 10th, is at least scheduled for the 10th of,
It's on my calendar,
Yeah.
October.
and so, I think it would be useful if we each tried to do a similar thing in terms of what I think would be most would be easiest for the committee is to put things into 3 categories. Boy, we really got to talk about this one. Yeah, I can understand that. Maybe that's a kind of a priority, or you know, best best opportunity. And then the third category would be, you know, that one is kind of in the middle, you know, with respect to, you know, we would need to talk about that, and it's almost like it depends. Like, so you've got, no, I can live with it, and I'm not sure. Is that,
No, yes, and maybe.
yeah,
Good.
yeah, right, exactly,
Or maybe next year.
possibly. You know, and those are not firm, but they're yes, no, maybe, yeah.
For each of the categories of cuts, revenue, and,
The cuts, I think, are the most important, but, yes.
Everything that's on this list is.
yeah.
And to, you know.
And
this-
these other expenditures at the back,
Yeah.
yes. So all three of those categories in those three different piles.
And as long as, you know, as long as members come with that done and ready to discuss it, I mean, I don't know that we necessarily have to put all of that in writing, because we can go, all right, what are the, you know,
From this list.
yes.
From this group of the
I
revenue.
think it's going to be a combination, both sides.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree with
Yeah. From all three parts, some reductions in costs, some increases in revenue, and some of these others that are non-essential items or stuff, or whatever you want to call that list at the back.
Molly, the list of revenue possibilities of increasing, did that come from your staff? I mean, you created these. I guess one thing, didn't we have a gas tax increase last year?
The local motor fuel tax did, but this is general fund that has to be used for roads. So it's just not on this
Oh, okay.
list because
Right.
it's a general fund and it wouldn't solve.
It's obligated.
Now, this is just general fund. You still have a streets and free
Yeah.
fund problem.
Right, big problem.
So that's where local motor fuel tax will come
Okay,
back in.
because that's what I looked at, and for some reason, I've been paying a lot of attention to prices of gas. And they change daily.
Well, it's now cheaper over on Rainbow Road than it is here.
Well, that's unusual, because going east is usually much
Yeah,
higher.
usually it is, but
That's something.
it's 15 to 25 cents
Really?
cheaper, yeah.
You can get those.
As of last night.
Would it be helpful, we did this with the council last year, and I can see using technology. If we can do like one of those doodle surveys where you guys can't actually see what other people have submitted, and I can give them to you here where you can see it, but you can't see it when you're doing it online.
I think, you know, my personal opinion is that I don't think there's necessarily a need, the way that the committee operates, to keep our opinions apart, as long as we don't discuss them, you know, as long as we're in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. I think we try to operate as much as we can on consensus and hear each other, and everybody has differing expertise, so I think it would be useful to,
Oh, no, I think when you're doing it online, when we're not in a meeting, for the Open Meetings Act.
oh, no, I understand that. What I'm saying is as long as we aren't sharing emails.
Yeah, and then when we come back, yep. then-
But I'm saying, I don't have a problem with people seeing in a doodle.
Okay.
And then when we get a compilation, right?
Right, and I bring it.
Yeah,
Yes, okay.
that's fine, we can
Yeah.
do that. And that's something that can be done in real time, so it doesn't have to be in the packet, so.
So much of this, I think, really has to have to make a decision whether it's going to get better or worse in the future.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we're going to get more police calls. I'm pretty sure you'll get more fire calls in the future, you know?
But the nature of those calls could change, which adds another, it adds another interesting layer in the sense that depending upon what department you're talking about, including public works, what kind of expertise do you need out of your officers, your firefighters, your public works people, because are we needing more people that are well-versed in drug interdiction and that sort of thing? Are we needing, just those kinds of examples?
Exactly. How do we know for sure we'll need more? Because I think the needs of the community change. We know cities have done things differently, and I don't mean that's with the police, but with services and resources, and then police calls have dropped, because frankly, the police are called on some things they shouldn't be getting called on, we all know that, so I don't think it's safe, or it's fair to assume things are always gonna, like, that assumes things are gonna get worse, if they're gonna be, when you say they're gonna
No,
be police
not
calls.
necessarily.
I'm just not calling out there to
We
wish
may
somebody
be,
a happy
we may
birthday.
be a happy city of 60,000 people.
Well, you know, I mean,
Not
you
in our
know,
lifetimes.
We don't know.
well, it could also be,
But we know that's not in the forecast, all right? Nobody is, or do you know something we don't, that the city's gonna jump 15,000 people here? That usually assumes crime's gonna get worse, because that's the perception the city, pardon?
no, I was talking about Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just curious, you know, where your thinking is in that, because I may not disagree.
Well, no,
with
my
you.
thinking is just what I said.
That we're gonna need more police
That-
calls, we're gonna get more fire calls.
Of those things, we need to look at them for the future. We're not trying to budget for the
But we're
past.
dealing right now in the here and now.
Yes.
Nobody said we were, I didn't hear myself say
So we
that,
have
did
to
you?
move forward.
We're looking at our budget forecast,
Determine
so I
what,
think it's not fair to assume we better plan on more crime or 12,000 people
Well,
moving
I
into the
didn't
city.
say-
I asked you a question and I didn't really ever get an answer on it.
I said that the likelihood of more calls in the future is greater than less calls.
Based on what? I'm just curious where that's coming from.
Yeah, but hold on. I think we're
That's what I
assuming, we're assuming facts that are not
Correct.
not
We're really
necessarily
speculating
in evidence,
right now.
but.
What do you
okay,
think
but-
budgeting is?
No,
Calm down, calm down.
Wait a minute, before,
I'm not attacking you
before
personally.
before I get lambasted here, let me just say that, I mean, it could be as simple as that the population gets older, and therefore you might
Yes, yeah.
have more EMS
More
calls
geriatric
for
needs, yes.
something like that. Or you might have more calls because, even with the same population, even with
Correct.
less
It has
violent
changed.
crime or
We're
things.
correct. We know
So-
that crime has been an issue, and that's a fact.
So we need to be aware of the fact that, as Chief Lowry said, they're getting more calls.
Yeah.
Well, what that means,
We don't,
It means
I can't give you
we're
an
getting
answer
more
on
calls.
what the breakdown is.
Tom?
A couple things. Sounds like we're close to wrapping it up in our assignments, but from a general perspective, going back to the very beginning, we haven't really commented much about the budget in its totality in the five-year forecast. Just the five-year forecast is a huge advantage.
Yes.
And now we have one for the first time, in my view, that is a pretty realistic picture of what the future looks like from our best financial
Yes.
forecasting capabilities of our acting city manager. And I appreciate the fact that this is in the open. We have a structural budget deficit. The community is not economically growing at a pace that enables it to sustain itself in its current budget, its current staffing, and the cost structure that we currently have. Right around that, no blame or anything, that's just a statement of fact. And that's what this forecast shows. So by the end of the period, we have all but eliminated our financial fund balance, and we have deficits running at $2 to $2.5 million a year. That's under current labor contracts, current staffing. So our ability to deal with the long term now is enhanced by this picture, I think. And I guess I would, first of all, appreciate that we have realistic forecast on the table. And as such, I appreciate the nature of the recommendations that the staff, and I'm assuming this is collective staff, has given their best effort to meet what is the structural deficit in recognition that the revenue streams are not there.
Here, here.
Okay?
Yes, thank
So,
you to everybody.
when we say, the staff recommendations and what priorities they may give, I'm assuming a lot of thought went into that as this document's prepared. So I'm anticipating, I'm hopeful that the staff, while not at all liking it or thinking this is the best picture of what we need, given the reality of our economic capability, this is what's necessary to get us to break even and get us back on track with what we have as revenue. So I'm largely in favor of it. My current thought is, without this further discussion, largely in favor of the trends and the staffing suggestions and the reality of facing this thing now. And some of us have presented this 3 years ago and said we should not hire additional staff, we should live within a fixed number. And if you want to allocate that number to be a financial director or an IT director, that's fine, but don't increase the absolute man. You set the priority, you allocate the dollars to where you need them, but somehow you got to live within a number so that the structural deficit is not what we're faced with today. But here we are 3 years later, and we're talking about eliminating a couple of positions we just put on because it's too bad. But the nature of the 5-year forecast brings you to deal with that reality. And the fact, the biggest concern I have out of it, and the chiefs in particular, are being impacted by a couple of high-level positions, relatively high-level positions. And then probably the biggest question is on the boots on the ground. Since we never staffed them, I see 2 coming off the list for the police department in this set of recommendations, and then some offset for temporary hiring over and above that new level so that you don't actually fall below, which is, we've always fallen below and then we fight to get back and then we fall below and we never catch up on our staff. And that's kind of a general comment, but that's the way I think it's really gone. So I'm thinking the chiefs have put a lot of thought and effort, not liking what's necessary, but, and to the comment that we've made previously in our recommendations, at least had them on the table for discussion. I was one, and I think we had general support that of not supporting a general tax increase at this time until we deal with this financial forecast. Because we have yet to discuss the $3 to $5 million in long-term capital needs. So I was 3 years ago reluctant because I didn't think staff was dealing with it. 2 years ago, 1 year ago, because we weren't dealing with it. If we deal with it and recognize our limitations, then I, for one, as a community member, would be more able to support a capital tax if I knew that we were going to take control of our operations and live within what means we have. So that's kind of my thought about it. I'm thankful for the forecast that it's out there. I'm thankful for the staff coming back with realistic measures to close that gap, and that as we contemplate what we want to do here at our next meeting, please add to that list our inability to deal with any of the capital needs, so that potential tax increases, if we throw them at this, are not available for any capital.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point to separate out operations and capital, because capital hasn't been on the table.
We haven't been able to get
at all. So do we have general agreement, consensus that we'll move forward with continued discussion next time based upon priorities that are jointly set or that are separately set, staff, and then the committee for some kind of a doodle?
I just want to add that on your 5-year financial plan that we keep
Yeah.
on here, page 97 starts that streets and fleet analysis, so if you want to refresh yourself on capital needs, it's still in that here.
So now, this isn't exactly on point, but I've spent the day, I'm doing comparisons between states on taxes and on what they get back in terms of intergovernmental revenue. And I've got pretty detailed data, and it's just absolutely amazing how if you just tweak this or you tweak that, you get a whole different picture of the financial stability of these governmental units. And we've run into that at the local level too. And I mean, I have data for the localities, so this is This is something that takes constant monitoring, and it's a real challenge when you're, and this is not a political statement, it's just a fact that, governmental units are running fairly tight in terms of their ability to do things beyond their basic delivery of core services. So some of this analytical stuff, though exceedingly important, doesn't necessarily get done. And it's nice to be dealing with facts rather than guesses or perceptions. And I agree with Tom about having, at least we've got some kind of a forecast to deal with that is not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, it's not pleasant, but it seems relatively honest. Anything else on the budget balancing measures? What next is the continuation of the 5-year financial plan discussion. Where do we want to go on that?
I can continue to put it on here in case you guys want to go
Right.
back.
I understand, and that's why I'm leaving it up to the committee as to what issue or issues they might want to take up, or
I think Tom's pretty straightforward on where we need to go with that. I think what you're talking about for all us to come back with what we consider priorities at the next meeting, I think it's going to be a really good start.
Yeah, I would agree.
Not that I don't want to continue discussing.
Well, yeah, I don't either at this particular point. I would go back to the extent that we had some staff members present, that at least a purpose of that was to find holes and gaps and opportunities, either from revenues were missing, operational things were missing, or how the hell are they doing it and getting it done without having higher tax rates. So I was always looking at it from a cost savings or a revenue enhancement from an opportunity standpoint. Who's doing best practices and why can they get by with lower cost structure than we do? And servicing per capita or however we want to measure it. So I think there's 3 or 4 communities, and I look for who's doing it the best or the cheapest, or has some revenue that we don't currently enjoy that we could capture if there was some. Those would be what I would spend my time on, and I haven't asked you to spend any time on it.
I did add the.
But there are 3 or 4 communities doing it. If that's the measure of better, there are 3 or 4 communities doing it better.
I did the amusement tax on there at Alderman Rico's request.
Yep.
But I didn't have enough information to give an estimate of what that would be. And then,
And that'd be interesting, right away, you get the question, University Towns and Planning, can they get that on their receipts?
so I know
Can we get-
Champaign, when we looked at it there, we chose not to do it because the UI doesn't pay.
Yeah, that's the problem. You gotta find somebody who's gonna pay us. If you can't get it from NIU, what's the purpose? I mean, that's where the money is.
And we have analyzed some, so like your gas use tax, there's actually a municipal use tax and a gas use tax, and one's on the dollar volume, and one's on per therm, one's on a dollar amount, and how those are structured. So I looked to see, because when I was at Naperville, Glenview, and Champaign, they did the municipal use tax. But there's kind of a loophole that larger corporations do, so if you add a gas use tax, it captures them. Well, guess what, we already did that here. So I've been looking at, like, is there those little adjustments we can make? And everything I looked at, so I looked at that restaurant bar, we already capture packaged liquor, because half the time that's a missed component of that. In other municipalities, we already do it. So I've been looking at it. I'm just not getting the updates because we've already done it.
And that's part of the 5-year plan, right? You said.
That's that 200-page document,
Yeah.
right?
There's a lot of information in there.
Yeah.
It really is.
It's a matter of gleaning out something that will be helpful.
Looks like we're pretty much in the middle. as a general
Yeah.
statement.
Anything else for the good of the order? I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Second.
None debatable, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?